Hey friends, I have been here for a long time, but today I need to talk. 39 years old, never thought I would be here and tell you this, but here I am and ready to share my life story. My wife, Sarah, 37F, and I have been married for 14 years, and until recently, I thought we were solid. We've got one daughter, Emma, 15F, who just started high school this year. Things were good, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Sarah has always been the kind of person who has a quick response for everything. She's smart, witty, and never seems to get flustered, no matter the situation. And honestly, I admired that about her. I've never been the jealous type. I trusted her. I'm not some guy who's suspicious of every little thing or worried about her guy friends. I've always believed that trust is the foundation of a good relationship. But lately, something's been off. It's hard to put into words, but it's like there's been this growing distance between us. I chalked it up to life getting busier, Emma starting high school, Sarah's new job as a substitute teacher at Emma's school, and me working long hours at the office. It seemed normal for things to get a bit hectic. Little did I know, I was completely in the dark. I'm not the kind of guy who goes through my wife's phone or checks up on her every move, but sometimes, things just hit you in the face. It started with small stuff, Sarah getting a lot of texts during dinner, always stepping out of the room to answer them. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we all have friends, right? She told me it was just her colleagues from the school, and I didn't press. Then, about a month ago, Emma had mentioned her teacher, Mr. Jackson, 43M, a bit more than usual. She liked him, said he was funny and cool, the kind of teacher who gets high schoolers. Again, didn't seem like a big deal. But looking back, there were these subtle changes in Sarah's behavior whenever his name came up. She'd go quiet, maybe change the subject, or suddenly start talking about how tired she was and how she needed an early night. It was weird, but I just brushed it off. After all, Sarah was always so convincing. The turning point came one weekend. Emma had a field trip planned with her school, and Sarah volunteered to chaperone. I stayed home, looking forward to some downtime. Emma called me from the trip, asking if I could pick her up early because she wasn't feeling well. No problem. I figured Sarah would come home with her. When I got to the school, though, Emma was waiting out front, alone. "Where's your mom?" I asked, already feeling that pit in my stomach. "She left early. She said she had something important to do." My heart sank. That wasn't like Sarah. She was the type to always be there, especially for Emma. Something wasn't adding up. When we got home, Sarah wasn't there, and she didn't come home until late. She told me she had forgotten about a meeting and had to rush off unexpectedly. I wanted to believe her, but something felt off. Still, I didn't want to seem paranoid. That night, as Sarah slipped into bed beside me, acting like everything was normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She kissed me goodnight, and I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. It all felt so out of place, her sudden disappearances, the way she always had some excuse ready, how distant she'd been lately. The next morning, I decided to trust my gut for once. I wasn't proud of it, but I looked at her phone while she was in the shower. And there it was, a text from Mr. Jackson, the same teacher Emma had been raving about. The message wasn't inappropriate, but it was odd. They'd been texting late at night, and some of the messages were too casual, too familiar for a student-teacher relationship. He was asking about her weekend plans, and Sarah responded like they were old friends, not just colleagues. When she came downstairs, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I asked her, "What's going on with you and Mr. Jackson?" For a moment, she looked caught off guard, but then, like clockwork, she slid into her usual calm demeanor. "What do you mean?" "He's just a coworker. We've had to talk more because of Emma's school stuff. She was good, really good. She had an answer for everything." Her tone was so casual, so dismissive, that it made me feel stupid for even asking. "Then why are you texting him at midnight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah raised an eyebrow and chuckled, "Oh, come on. Don't tell me you're jealous. It's not like that, I promise. We're just talking about work and school. You know how stressful teaching can be." I didn't know how to respond. She made it sound so innocent, like I was the one overreacting. And I wanted to believe her, I really did. But something about the way she was so quick to explain it all away didn't sit right with me. That conversation stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. Even though Sarah brushed it off so smoothly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden. It's weird because I'm not a suspicious guy by nature. Trust was always a big part of our relationship. But now, everything felt like a lie. I started to question myself. Was I reading too much into things? Was I just overreacting? Sarah had always been so good at making me feel like I had nothing to worry about. She'd tell me stories about her day, laughing about little things that happened at school, and I'd want to believe it was all normal. But there was this weight in my chest that wouldn't go away. I kept picturing her texting him late at night, sneaking off to God knows where. It was like our whole life together started feeling like a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know my part. The worst part was, Sarah didn't seem fazed at all. She kept up her same routine, work, school, and then home, as if nothing had changed. She acted like we'd never had that conversation, like I hadn't asked her point blank about Mr. Jackson. And maybe that's what hurt the most. She didn't even feel the need to reassure me. She just assumed I'd let it go. And for a while, I almost did. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. But then, late one night, after Sarah had gone to bed, I was alone in the kitchen, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook, when I saw a tagged photo of Sarah at a bar. The timestamp was from the night she supposedly had that meeting during the school trip. She was with a group of people, including Mr. Jackson. They were standing too close, laughing like they shared some secret. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Everything came crashing down at once. All the little things I'd ignored, the late texts, the disappearances, the lies, they were all right there, staring me in the face. I didn't sleep that night. The picture kept replaying in my mind, Sarah with Mr. Jackson, standing so close, the way they looked at each other. It wasn't just friendly. It wasn't work-related. I could feel it in my gut. And no matter how many excuses I'd tried to make for her, there was no brushing this off anymore. The next morning, I waited for her at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, rehearsing in my head how I was going to confront her. I wasn't going to let her wiggle out of this one. I didn't have some vague suspicion now. I had proof. When she came down the stairs, I felt my chest tighten. She smiled at me like it was any other day. "Morning," she said, grabbing a cup of coffee, completely unaware of the storm brewing in me. I couldn't even look at her. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in my voice, but still played it cool. "About what?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. "About this." Her face went pale for just a second, barely noticeable, but I caught it. She quickly recovered, though, letting out a small, forced laugh. "Oh my God, seriously? That's from the teacher's night out. You knew about it. I told you I'd be meeting some colleagues for drinks after the field trip." "No, you told me you had a meeting," I said, my voice rising. "Not that you'd be at a bar with him." She blinked, taking a step back, and I could see her working out her next move. "Okay, yes, I was at a bar, but it's not what you think. It was just a group of us teachers." "You're really going to get upset over this?" I didn't back down. "Why didn't you tell me? Why lie about it? You didn't come home until late. And you've been texting him, at midnight, Sarah." "Midnight? Do you really expect me to believe this is just about work?" For a moment, she stood there, staring at me like she couldn't believe I was questioning her. Then she shook her head, putting her cup down on the counter. "You're making something out of nothing." I didn't lie. I didn't think it was a big deal, and honestly, I didn't want to deal with you getting weird about me going out with coworkers. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Am I?" I said, holding her gaze. "Because I don't think this is just about you having drinks with coworkers. I think something's going on with you and Mr. Jackson." She laughed again, but it was hollow, defensive. "Wow. You really don't trust me, do you? After all these years, you're going to let a stupid picture make you think the worst of me?" I stood up, feeling a mix of frustration and heartbreak. "I don't know what to think anymore, Sarah. But you're hiding something. I can feel it." Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms, her tone turning cold. "Believe what you want, then. I don't have time for this." And just like that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my world unraveling. She had a way of deflecting everything, turning it back on me, making me feel like I was the one who was crazy. But I wasn't going to let it go this time. I couldn't. After Sarah walked out, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the empty space where she'd been. Her ability to shut things down, to twist the narrative, left me feeling like I was in a fog. It was like every doubt I had was immediately swallowed up by the certainty she projected. But no matter how much she tried to dismiss it, I couldn't let go of that gnawing feeling in my gut. The house felt quiet, too quiet. Emma had already left for school, so it was just me and my thoughts. I went back to that picture in my mind, replaying the look on their faces, the closeness between Sarah and Mr. Jackson. It felt like I was unraveling everything I thought I knew about her, about us. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I couldn't stop the flood of memories rushing in, the late-night texts, the excuses, the way she'd become distant, emotionally checked out. Maybe I had been blind to it for too long, too trusting. I started to wonder how long it had been going on. Was it recent? Had this started when Emma transferred to high school? Or had it been happening long before, right under my nose? For the first time in our marriage, I started to feel paranoid, second-guessing everything. I even thought about hiring a private investigator, something I never imagined I'd consider. It felt so out of character for me, but Sarah's constant lies were pushing me to places I didn't want to go. That evening, I tried to act normal when Emma got home. I didn't want to drag her into this mess, but I couldn't help feeling like she had unknowingly been part of it, too. She kept mentioning how much she liked Mr. Jackson, how he was her favorite teacher. The thought of him being involved with Sarah, while he was also her teacher, made me sick to my stomach. After dinner, I told Sarah we needed to talk again. I couldn't let it go. "I just want the truth," I said, my voice breaking a little despite my best efforts to stay composed. "If there's something going on, just tell me." She sighed deeply, rubbing her temples like I was giving her a headache. "We've been through this already. You're being ridiculous. I'm not going to keep defending myself against something that doesn't exist." "Then why do I feel like I don't even know you anymore?" I asked, my voice almost pleading. "I'm your husband, Sarah. I deserve to know what's going on." She looked at me with this cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. "You want the truth? Fine. There's nothing going on. But if you keep pushing like this, you're going to destroy us. You're going to push me away for good. Is that what you want?" Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She wasn't just denying it anymore, she was threatening to leave if I kept digging. I felt trapped, like no matter what I did, I couldn't win. If I stopped asking, I'd live with this doubt forever. If I kept pushing, I risked losing her entirely. And that's when the panic really set in. The panic stayed with me all night, twisting in my gut like a knot I couldn't untangle. Sarah's words haunted me, "You're going to push me away for good." It felt like she was turning everything back on me, making me question myself again. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the problem. Something was wrong, and I couldn't just ignore it anymore. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal, for Emma's sake. But inside, I was falling apart. Every time I saw Sarah, I was reminded of the lies, the distance. She acted like nothing was wrong, like she had moved past our argument, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all a charade. She was too calm, too composed, while I was slowly unraveling. The final straw came that Friday. Sarah was supposed to be home by 6 p.m. We had plans to go out for dinner as a family, something we hadn't done in a while. Emma was excited, and I figured maybe we could have a normal evening, put all this behind us, if only for a couple of hours. But 6 p.m. came and went, and there was no sign of Sarah. I texted her, no response. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, fiddling with her phone, asking when we were leaving. I could hear the hope in her voice, the way she still believed everything was fine. I didn't want to disappoint her, so I told her maybe Mom got caught up at work. By 7:30, I couldn't sit still anymore. I paced around the house, checking my phone every few minutes, knowing in my heart where she was but still hoping I was wrong. Emma was upstairs in her room by now, clearly disappointed but trying to hide it. Then I remembered something: our phones were still synced for location sharing. It was something we set up years ago for safety, with me traveling for work and Sarah running errands late at night. I hadn't thought about it in a long time, but now, I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I pulled up the app. There she was. Not at work, not stuck in traffic, at the same damn hotel I'd seen in that photo with Mr. Jackson. I felt my world crash down around me. All the excuses, the late nights, the distance, it all clicked into place. She had been lying to me, over and over, and now I had undeniable proof. This wasn't just my imagination, and it wasn't me being insecure. She was cheating. She had been for who knows how long. For a few minutes, I just stood there in shock, staring at the blinking dot on my phone screen. I could feel the blood rushing to my head, my heart pounding in my chest. I was angry, furious, actually, but more than that, I felt betrayed. Like I had been made a fool of in my own home, in front of my own daughter. The woman I'd trusted, the woman I thought I knew, had been sneaking around behind my back with our daughter's teacher. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys and headed out the door. I didn't even know what I was planning to do, but I couldn't just sit there any longer. I needed answers. I needed to see her, to confront her with the truth she'd been hiding from me for God knows how long. I drove in a daze, the road ahead of me a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight I thought I might snap it in two. I didn't even know what I was going to say when I saw her, but I knew I had to be there, to see it with my own eyes. That blinking dot on my phone had set something off in me, and I wasn't about to let this go. When I pulled up to the hotel, I parked at the far end of the lot, out of sight. My heart was pounding, and my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. What was I even doing? Was I really about to storm into a hotel and catch my wife in the act? This felt surreal, like something you'd see in a bad movie, not real life. But this was my life now, my reality. I sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm down, but the anger and betrayal burned too hot inside me. I had no idea what room she was in, but that didn't matter. I knew she was here with him, Mr. Jackson. I walked into the lobby, my palms sweaty as I approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter glanced up at me, smiling politely. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice cheerful, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "I'm looking for my wife, Sarah Dawson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think she checked in earlier." She frowned slightly, tapping on her keyboard, looking at her screen. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't give out guest information." My stomach clenched. "I just need to know if she's here." I'm sorry, she repeated, this time with a little more firmness. Without permission from the guest, I can't share that information. I nodded, trying to keep my cool. I had no plan, no idea what I was doing, but I couldn't just walk out of there without trying. I walked back outside, feeling like a fool. And that's when I saw her, Sarah, walking out of the elevator, her hair disheveled, her jacket slung over her arm. She hadn't seen me yet, too busy looking down at her phone. Behind her, a few steps away, was Mr. Jackson. He wasn't even trying to hide it. He had that smug, casual look on his face like he didn't have a care in the world. Something inside me snapped. Sarah! I shouted, my voice echoing across the parking lot. Her head jerked up, and when she saw me standing there, her face went pale. For the first time, she looked genuinely shocked. Mr. Jackson froze, glancing between us like he was trying to figure out whether to stay or run. What the hell is this? I said, marching toward them, my voice shaking with rage. Sarah opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She just stood there, stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. Mr. Jackson didn't say a word, he just stared at me, wide-eyed. So this is why you've been lying to me? This is what you've been doing while I've been working my ass off at home? I felt my hands trembling, barely able to control myself. Sarah finally found her voice, but it was weak, defensive. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. I laughed bitterly, the sound of it almost hysterical. You're walking out of a hotel with him, Sarah. What do you think it looks like? She glanced at Mr. Jackson, then back at me, scrambling for something to say. We just had a drink, okay? It was nothing. A drink? I spat. You expect me to believe that? After all the lies, the late-night texts, the disappearing acts, this is just a drink? Her eyes filled with panic. I swear, it's not what you think. Mr. Jackson, for his part, stayed quiet, looking awkward and uncomfortable. He hadn't moved, hadn't tried to step in or defend her. I guess even he knew there was no talking their way out of this. I could feel my hands shaking, the anger rising to a boiling point, but I didn't want to lose it in front of this guy, or Sarah. Instead, I took a step back, feeling disgusted, betrayed, and unbelievably hurt. I don't want to hear another lie, I said, my voice low, barely holding it together. I'm done. Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked back to my car. I didn't need to hear her excuses or see the look on her face. I was done. Done with the lies, done with being played for a fool. As I drove away, leaving her standing there, I realized that the person I thought I knew, the woman I married, had been slipping away for a long time. And I'd been too blind to see it. I wasn't done yet. As I drove away, my head spinning with anger and disbelief, something inside me told me to turn back. Maybe it was the way Sarah had looked at him, the guilt on her face, or the fact that Mr. Jackson hadn't said a single word, not even to defend himself. Whatever it was, I knew there was more going on than she wanted me to believe. I circled the block, parking out of sight, and waited. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't let it go. Not like this. I needed the truth, undeniable, irrefutable proof that would end the charade for good. Minutes later, I saw them. Sarah and Mr. Jackson weren't heading home. They were walking back into the hotel. I watched as they disappeared through the side entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't a drink, and I was about to see exactly what they'd been hiding. I followed them in, staying out of sight as they walked down the hallway. The elevator dinged, and they stepped inside. I waited a moment, then hurried over to check which floor they'd gone to. The number lit up on the panel, 3rd floor. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my breath ragged with a mix of adrenaline and rage. When I reached the 3rd floor, I spotted them at the end of the hall, heading into a room. They didn't see me. I hung back, watching as Sarah pulled out a keycard, and they disappeared inside. This was it. No more lies, no more excuses. I was about to catch them red-handed. I stormed down the hallway, my footsteps heavy on the carpet. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached their door, my hand already balled into a fist. Without thinking, I pounded on the door. For a moment, nothing. Then, I heard shuffling inside, hushed voices. Sarah's voice, frantic. Mr. Jackson's too, low and nervous. I wasn't waiting any longer. I pounded again, harder this time. Open the door, Sarah. There was a pause, then the sound of the door unlocking. When it opened, Sarah stood there, her face pale, hair a mess, eyes wide with panic. Behind her, Mr. Jackson stood by the bed, frozen like a deer in headlights, shirt untucked, belt unbuckled. I didn't need to ask. The scene said it all. The rumpled sheets, their disheveled appearances, there was no talking their way out of this one. What the hell is this? I shouted, stepping inside. This is what you call nothing. This is just a drink. Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face was a mask of guilt and fear, her usual calm, manipulative demeanor shattered. She knew she was caught. Mr. Jackson didn't even try to defend himself. He looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed and ashamed. But I didn't care about him. My focus was on Sarah, the woman I had trusted, the woman I had built a life with. How long? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper now, trembling with emotion. How long have you been lying to me? She swallowed, her voice shaking as she tried to answer. I'm sorry. It wasn't supposed to happen. It's not. Not what? Not what it looks like. I spat, cutting her off. Don't lie to me, Sarah. Not anymore. I've been nothing but good to you, and this is how you repay me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. Not this time. I wasn't going to be manipulated by her fake tears, by her excuses. I was done. I trusted you, I continued, my voice breaking. I gave you everything, our family, our life. And you threw it all away. For this? For him. She wiped at her eyes, but it didn't matter anymore. There was no coming back from this. No apology, no explanation could fix the damage she'd done. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I gave one last look at Sarah and Mr. Jackson. We're done, Sarah. There's no coming back from this. I hope he was worth it. With that, I left the room, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed down the hallway, but all I felt was a heavy, crushing silence. It was over, our marriage, our life together, everything. As I drove away from the hotel, I kept replaying everything in my head, Sarah's betrayal, Mr. Jackson's smug face, and the way she tried to lie her way out even when I caught her red-handed. I thought I was done. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. But then, something unexpected happened. I had barely made it 2 blocks from the hotel when my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the screen, it was Sarah. Of course, it was. She probably wanted to spin some new web of lies, try to explain away what I had just seen. I wasn't in the mood for it. But something made me pull over and answer anyway. Hello. I snapped, expecting more excuses. But it wasn't Sarah's voice on the other end. Mr. Dawson. This is Officer Reynolds with the local police department. Is this your wife, Sarah Dawson's, number? My heart skipped a beat. Yes. What's going on? I'm sorry to inform you, but we've just had an incident. Your wife was involved in a car accident near the hotel where she was staying. She's been taken to the hospital in critical condition. I froze. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard him right. What? What do you mean, an accident? Her car was hit by another vehicle at an intersection not far from the hotel, the officer explained. We're still gathering information, but it seems the driver of the other car ran a red light. I suggest you head to the hospital as soon as possible. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced with confusion. How could this be happening? Just minutes ago, I had stormed out of that hotel, ready to leave her and the lies behind for good. And now, an accident. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of it all. This woman had torn apart our marriage, lied to my face, and betrayed me in the most devastating way possible. And now, she was lying in a hospital bed, maybe fighting for her life. A part of me wanted to stay right there in the car, let someone else deal with it. After all, hadn't she caused enough damage? Hadn't she already taken everything from me? But another part of me, the part that had spent 14 years building a life with her, couldn't ignore what had just happened. I put the car in gear and drove straight to the hospital. When I arrived, everything felt surreal. The sterile smell of the emergency room, the low hum of voices, the beeping of machines, it was all so far removed from the chaos that had just exploded in my life. I walked up to the front desk, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of the last few hours. I'm here for Sarah Dawson, I told the nurse, my voice barely steady. She glanced at her clipboard and nodded. She's in surgery right now. You'll have to wait. I sat down in the waiting area, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I couldn't make sense of it, how my life had gone from unraveling due to her affair to this. In a matter of minutes, everything had flipped. Now, instead of anger, I was sitting here wondering if she would even make it out of surgery alive. Hours passed, each one dragging slower than the last. I felt like I was suspended in some twisted reality where none of this made sense. And then, finally, the doctor came out. "Mr. Dawson?" he asked, looking tired. I stood up, feeling my legs wobble under me. "Is she?" "She made it through the surgery," he said, his tone cautious. "But there were serious injuries. A collapsed lung, internal bleeding, and multiple fractures. It's going to be a long road to recovery, if she pulls through." I didn't know how to respond. The anger that had consumed me just hours ago had somehow morphed into something else, an empty, hollow feeling I couldn't even begin to describe. "Can I see her?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The doctor nodded and led me down the hall. When I walked into the room, I barely recognized her. Sarah was hooked up to machines, her face pale, bruises forming on her skin. She looked so fragile, so different from the woman who had stood in front of me at that hotel, deflecting and lying. I stood there for a while, just staring at her, trying to figure out what I was feeling. Was it relief? Anger? Pity? I didn't even know. All I knew was that everything had changed in an instant. Suddenly, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. She looked at me, confused, her voice barely a whisper. What happened?" I swallowed, unsure of what to say. "You were in an accident, I managed to get out." Her eyes darted around the room, clearly trying to piece it all together. And then, the reality hit her. Her lips parted, and a tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice so faint I almost didn't hear it. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I stood there, the words hanging in the air, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't know what to say. Months passed after Sarah's accident, and life fell into a strange rhythm. The anger and betrayal I'd felt that day at the hotel were somehow pushed aside, replaced by something quieter, something heavier. In the days following the crash, everything had become about her recovery, doctors, surgeries, physical therapy. And somehow, in the middle of all that, the affair seemed to fade into the background. I don't know when it started exactly, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not really, but maybe a kind of acceptance. I'd stayed by Sarah's side through all of it, taking care of her, driving her to appointments, helping her navigate the slow, painful process of healing. At first, it felt like something I had to do. After all, we'd been married for 14 years, how could I not? Sarah was different during those months. The arrogance, the lies, the emotional distance, those things were gone, replaced by someone who seemed fragile, humbled by the accident. She didn't talk about Mr. Jackson anymore, didn't bring up the affair or try to explain herself. She just relied on me. And, against all odds, I was there for her. The accident had taken its toll, but by some miracle, Sarah had pulled through. Now, as the months passed, she was almost back to her old self, physically, at least. The bruises faded, the limp in her walk smoothed out, and she was starting to look like the woman I'd known for most of my life. I'll admit, there were moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, I had forgiven her. After all, we were living together again, sharing dinners, talking like we used to. She'd ask about my day, and I'd tell her, and for a while, things almost felt normal. I even caught myself laughing at her jokes sometimes, like we were just another married couple trying to get through life's ups and downs. But there was always something lurking beneath the surface, something unspoken. I told myself I was moving on, that maybe people could change. After everything that had happened, she was different now, right? And I'd changed too, hadn't I? I wasn't the man who had stormed out of that hotel, filled with fury and betrayal. I was the man who had stayed, who had helped his wife get back on her feet. But as Sarah grew stronger, so did something else inside me. It was like a shadow creeping up behind me, reminding me of the truth I didn't want to face. One night, a few months after the accident, Sarah and I were sitting on the couch, watching a movie. It was quiet, comfortable even. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, I almost believed we were okay. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible over the sound of the TV. "For what?" I asked, half listening, half distracted by the film. "For everything," she said, her voice soft. "For staying. For helping me. For giving me another chance." I didn't respond at first. I couldn't. My mind flashed back to the hospital, to those early days when I wasn't sure if she would survive, and to that moment in the hotel when everything had shattered between us. Sarah shifted, looking up at me. "You've forgiven me, haven't you?" I stared at the TV, my jaw tightening. She said it so casually, like forgiveness was something you could just give after everything that had happened. "I don't know," I said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. She looked surprised, almost hurt. "What do you mean? We've been getting through this together. Haven't we?" I turned to face her, feeling the weight of months of silence pressing down on me. "I've been here, yes. I've helped you recover, yes. But forgiveness? I don't know if I can just erase what happened." Sarah's face fell, and for the first time in a while, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "But we've been doing so well," she said, her voice trembling. "You said we'd get through this. You stayed." "I stayed because I couldn't just walk away while you were hurt," I said, my voice flat. "But that doesn't mean I've forgotten what you did. I can't pretend like it didn't happen." There it was, the truth, hanging in the air between us. Sarah sat up, pulling away from me. I thought you forgave me. I thought we were moving past it." "I thought so too," I admitted. "But every time I look at you, I still see that day. I still see what you did, what you lied about. And I don't know if I can ever move past that." She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, staring at the floor. I could feel the distance growing between us again, that same cold space that had formed after I'd caught her with him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know what else to say. I thought, after everything, I thought maybe we could fix this." "I wanted to believe that too," I said quietly. "But it's not that simple." I stood up, needing to get out of the room, to breathe, to think. As I headed for the door, I heard her voice behind me, soft and desperate. Are you going to leave me? I stopped, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. I don't know yet, Sarah. I really don't. And with that, I walked out, leaving her sitting there in the dark, the illusion of forgiveness finally shattered. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. I'd spent the night lying awake, replaying everything in my head, the accident, the months of recovery, the strained conversations, and that moment on the couch when I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget what had happened. I couldn't forgive Sarah, not in the way she needed. It was time for both of us to face the truth. I decided that morning, clear as day, it was time to let her go. I got up, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Sarah to come downstairs. I knew I had to do this today, for her, for me, for all of us. I couldn't keep pretending that things were going to go back to the way they were. We'd both been living in this limbo, me out of duty, her out of fear, but it wasn't fair. Not anymore. When she finally came down, she looked tired, worn down by the conversation from the night before. Her eyes met mine, but there was a tension between us that neither of us could ignore. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady but calm. She didn't argue, didn't protest. She simply nodded and sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap like she was bracing for whatever was coming. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us, about what happened, about these last few months. She glanced away, already knowing where this was going. I know. I could tell last night. I stayed with you through your recovery because I couldn't leave you like that, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. I couldn't walk away while you were hurt. But now that you've healed, now that you're back on your feet, I think it's time we face the truth. Her eyes widened slightly, and she shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. What truth? That we're not going to get past this, I said, the words coming out more firmly than I expected. I thought I could move on, that maybe we could rebuild, but I can't. Every time I look at you, I still see what you did. And I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't live like that. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out, her voice trembling. But we've come so far. You've been here, helping me, taking care of me. I thought we were getting better. I was with you while you were recovering because I cared, I said, gently pulling my hand away from hers. But it wasn't the same as forgiving you. I've been trying to convince myself that I could let it go, but I can't. I don't trust you, Sarah. And that's no way to live. She blinked back tears, shaking her head. So, what are you saying? You're leaving. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. No. I'm not leaving. You are. You're free, Sarah. Free to go, to live your life however you want. I stayed until you recovered, and now it's time for both of us to move on. Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I could feel the guilt rising in my chest, but I knew this had to be done. The life we had before was gone, and holding on to it was only going to hurt us both more in the long run. Emma will stay with me, I added, knowing this was the hardest part. I've already looked into transferring her to another school. I don't want her stuck in this mess. She doesn't deserve to see us fall apart like this. Sarah lifted her head, her tear-streaked face full of pain. You're taking her from me. I shook my head softly. I'm not taking her. You'll still be her mother, and she can visit anytime. But she needs stability right now. She needs space to heal, just like we do. Sarah's lip quivered, and she wiped at her face with shaking hands. I never meant to hurt you. I thought maybe. I know, I said, my voice soft but firm. But we can't go back. And this isn't about punishing you. It's about doing what's right for everyone. You need a fresh start, and so do I. She sat there for a moment, staring at me, as if trying to find the words to argue, to fight. But she didn't. Deep down, she knew I was right. When? She asked, her voice small and broken. Soon, I said, standing up from the table. You can stay until you figure things out, but we'll start making arrangements. She nodded, her shoulders slumped, defeated. I'll pack some things. As I watched her walk out of the room, it didn't feel like a victory. There was no satisfaction in it. It just felt necessary. Like the end of something long overdue. The next few days passed in a strange blur. Sarah kept mostly to herself, packing her things in quiet resignation. The house felt heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. We weren't fighting anymore. There was no point in arguing, everything had already been said. We were two people trying to untangle lives that had been woven together for over a decade. Emma didn't know the full story. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the affair, about Mr. Jackson. All she knew was that her mom would be moving out, and she'd be starting at a new school. I told her it was a fresh start for all of us, and she accepted it, at least on the surface. But I could see the confusion and sadness in her eyes. She was smart enough to know that things between her mom and me had broken beyond repair. The morning Sarah was set to leave, the house felt eerily quiet. I watched as she moved the last of her boxes into the hallway, her face blank, her movements robotic. There was no anger, no pleading, no dramatic final conversation. Just an air of inevitability. We stood in the living room, the space between us feeling vast, like we were strangers instead of two people who had built a life together. I'm sorry it came to this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I really am. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What could I say that hadn't already been said? I never wanted to hurt you, she continued, her eyes welling up with tears. But I know. I know I did. And I'll have to live with that. For a moment, I felt the old familiar ache of what we'd lost, the years of love, the life we'd built, the plans we'd made. But that feeling was buried under the harsh reality of what had happened. There was no fixing this. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said quietly, finally meeting her eyes. I really do. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. Take care of Emma. She's a good kid. She's going to need you. I will, I promised, and I meant it. Emma would be my focus now. She was what mattered most. Sarah picked up the last box, hesitating for just a second. Maybe one day. I shook my head gently. Let's not talk about one day. We need to focus on today. She gave a sad, understanding smile and turned toward the door. As she stepped out, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of relief that comes with joy or victory, it was the kind that comes from finally facing a painful truth and letting it go. The door closed behind her, and I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been. It was over. After everything, after the betrayal, the recovery, the months of pretending, it was finally, undeniably over. I walked upstairs to find Emma in her room, quietly packing her backpack for school. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine for some kind of reassurance. I knelt down beside her, pulling her into a hug. It's just us now, kiddo, I whispered. But we're going to be okay. She hugged me back, tighter than she had in a long time. I know, Dad. And for the first time in months, I actually believed it.